A girl lies lifeless in the carved chamber of a royal tomb. Beside her, a king weeps. In the shadows, a nurse cradles a baby whose fate is unknown. No one agrees on who they were or why they died. Their resting place lies beyond the pale cliffs of the Nile's east bank, where, in the 14th century BCE, Pharaoh Akhenaten built a city unlike any Egypt had seen. He called it Akhetaten, the horizon of the Aten, a place not for many gods, but for one. Stone boundary stelae still mark its edges, stretching from the river into the desert. Streets ran wide and straight, temples were left roofless so sunlight could touch every altar. The Aten, the sun's disk, would no longer be worshipped in shadow. But Akhenaten's vision stripped Egypt's ancient gods of their names, their temples and their priests. In their place stood only the Aten's blazing circle, its rays ending in hands that touched the royal family alone. It was meant to be eternal, a city of light carved into the desert. Yet in the cliffs beyond, the tombs meant to secure its legacy would one day stand silent and raise questions that still haunt Egypt's history. Cut deep into the cliffs east of Amarna lies the royal tomb of Akhenaten. Work began around year 9 of his reign, about 1344 BCE, as part of a necropolis meant for the king, his family, and his most loyal officials. The design followed his vision, a long central corridor aligned to the rising sun, vaulted burial halls, and side chambers for queens and princesses. It was a royal tomb, unlike those in Thebes, dedicated not to Osiris, but to the Aten's eternal light. Yet the burial hall stands empty. The red granite sarcophagus, once carved with images of Nefertiti as a protective goddess, lies shattered. No trace of Akhenaten's body has been found here. Some scholars turn to a different place entirely, KV 55 in the Valley of the Kings, discovered in 1907. The small undecorated tomb held a desecrated coffin, its gold face removed, royal names hacked away. 4 canopic jars, carved with the features of a woman, possibly Kia, sat nearby, along with fragments of a gilded shrine linked to Akhenaten's mother, Tie. The male skeleton inside, about 35 years old, showed signs of a hurried burial and later water damage. DNA tests in the 21st century confirmed the body was a close relative of Tutankhamun, almost certainly his father. Many identify him as Akhenaten. Others argue for Smenkhkare, a short-lived, enigmatic ruler who may have been a co-regent or successor. Why would a king's body be moved from Amarna to a plain, unmarked tomb in Thebes? Egypt's history offers one answer. During political upheaval, mummies were sometimes relocated to protect them from tomb robbers or to hide them from enemies. In Akhenaten's case, his religious revolution had collapsed, and his name was already being chiseled out of monuments. Concealment may not have been for safety, but for erasure. Whoever the KV-55 man was, his burial breaks every rule of royal honor. And in the next chamber of this story, the carved image of a funeral hints at a loss even more personal, one that may have marked the beginning of the end for Akhetaten. Deep within the royal tomb of Amarna, in a chamber carved for the king's family, one wall holds a scene unlike any in Egypt's other royal burials. Under the Aten's rays, a young woman lies lifeless on a funerary bier. At her side stand Akhenaten and Nefertiti, their hands raised to their faces in gestures of mourning. Behind them, a nurse cradles a swaddled infant, while another attendant shields her eyes in grief. The figure on the bier is widely believed to be Princess Meketaten, Akhenaten, and Nefertiti's second daughter. Inscriptions name her in nearby fragments, though her body has never been found. She appears in earlier scenes alive, but here she is gone, her ka, or life force, departing to the afterlife. Based on these inscriptions, her death is thought to have occurred in year 14 of Akhenaten's reign, around 1336 BCE. Why she died remains a matter of debate. One theory is plague. Amarna may have suffered outbreaks during its brief life, possibly brought by foreign envoys or trade. Another is childbirth. The infant in the scene could be her newborn, either stillborn or destined to be raised by the royal family. Yet in Egyptian funerary art, newborns in such contexts are rare, adding to the puzzle. Some scholars go further, questioning the identity of the woman altogether. Could it have been another royal daughter, such as Meritaten or Ankhesenpaten, or even a lesser-known wife of Akhenaten? A few suggest the entire scene may be symbolic rather than literal, the baby representing the deceased's rebirth into the afterlife, rather than an actual child. What makes this image even more remarkable is its style. The Amarna period broke radically from centuries of rigid, idealized depictions of the royal family. Here, the king and queen are not shown as untouchable deities, but as grieving parents, their elongated faces etched with visible sorrow. The Aten's rays end in tiny hands that reach only toward them and the bier, emphasizing their divine connection even in the moment of loss. In earlier dynasties, pharaohs were rarely shown in scenes of personal vulnerability, especially over the death of a child. Funerary art focused on ritual order, not human emotion. This carving violates those expectations, capturing an intimate moment at the heart of a religious revolution. If Meketaten died in the city's final years, the loss may have compounded the pressures already straining Akhenaten: political unrest, waning support for the Aten cult, and the looming return of the old gods. No burial chamber for Meketaten has ever been found. If she was interred here, her remains have vanished, perhaps removed when the city was deserted. What survives is this carved moment, frozen grief under the sun god's light, and the mystery of the infant whose fate is lost to time. Beyond this room, more tombs lie unfinished, their walls half-cut, as if the chisels were put down in haste and never returned. North of the royal wadi, two great rock-cut monuments open into the pale cliffs, the northern and southern tombs of Amarna's necropolis. They were begun around year 9 of Akhenaten's reign, roughly 1344 BCE, for Egypt's elite, high officials, priests of Aten, and possibly members of the royal family. The northern group includes the tomb of Ai, later a pharaoh, and that of Panesi, the high priest of Aten. But many other chambers were never completed, standing in a strange limbo between vision and reality, their walls frozen mid-carving. In the dim light, the story of abandonment is written in stone. Some walls are smoothed and ready for paint, others still rough with the first blows of the chisel. Figures of the royal family under the Aten's rays emerge half-formed, their limbs ending in uncut stone. Decorative friezes stop abruptly, as though the artisans had stepped away for a short break and never returned. The northern tomb, larger and more ambitious, shows the beginnings of a vast pillared hall. In one chamber, the outlines of Akhenaten and Nefertiti can be seen approaching the altar, but their forms dissolve into unshaped rock above the waist. The southern tomb, intended as another grand burial, barely made it past its architectural skeleton. Corridors cut but unlined, niches for statues never carved. Archaeologists note that by year 14 of Akhenaten's reign, around 1336 BCE, and certainly before his death a few years later, work had stopped entirely. In the quarry areas, unfinished stone blocks and tool scatter still mark where masons were working before the city's heartbeat faltered. There are no signs of reoccupation or later looting, only the stillness of work abandoned mid-task. Chisel marks are crisp, as if the stonecutters had put down their tools one afternoon and never returned. First surveyed in detail in the early 20th century, these tombs preserve a frozen moment in Amarna's history. Why would Egypt's finest craftsmen walk away from such commissions? Theories converge on the same turbulent years that saw the death of Meketaten and the possible loss of Akhenaten's body. Political upheaval may have drained the workforce as the court fractured. A return to the old gods could have halted construction entirely, erasing the need for Atenist tombs. Some even suggest plague struck the labor force, cutting the city's population and ending its great projects overnight. Whatever the cause, these silent chambers speak of a city that stopped breathing. And as the tools lay idle in the dust, the focus of Amarna's worship turned inward, toward the Aten's rays and the singular divine figure they touched. Nearly a decade into Akhenaten's rule, around 1344 BCE, Akhenaten stood close to completion. At its center stood the great temple of the Aten, an open-air complex where no roof could block the god's light. Rows of offering tables filled its courtyards, each meant to catch the morning sun. The walls blazed with painted reliefs, showing the royal family beneath the Aten's disk, its rays ending in delicate hands that reached toward them alone. In traditional Egypt, the afterlife belonged to Osiris, and the dead passed through a trial before 42 judges. Here, Osiris was nowhere to be found. In his place stood the Aten, faceless, formless, unapproachable, except through the king and queen. Scenes in the tomb of Meria II, Akhenaten's chief steward, show foreign envoys presenting tribute under Aten's rays. The light touches only the seated king and queen, Every other figure, from royal children to visiting dignitaries, remains outside the god's embrace. This was theology in stone. The Aten's blessings flowed only through the royal household. The shift carried enormous political and economic weight. The great estates and treasuries of the old gods, especially Amun, were stripped of resources. Offerings and labor, once divided among dozens of temples, now poured into Aten's cult. Entire industries, sculptors, goldsmiths, quarrymen, were redirected to serve the king's vision, concentrating power in his court and leaving the traditional priesthood sidelined. Archaeologists have found evidence of this reallocation in the form of dismantled shrine blocks, reused in later construction, and relief fragments from the great temple now scattered in museums. The message was clear. The old order was not simply reformed, it was dismantled. Around year 12 of the reign, roughly 1338 BCE, Atenist art had hardened into its most rigid form. In official scenes, no priest stands before the god, no citizen receives his light. The Aten sees through the king's eyes. Worship of the god is inseparable from loyalty to Akhenaten himself. Egyptologists have called it a spiritual revolution or a divine dictatorship. It was a vision at its peak, and perhaps already tipping toward collapse. Within a few years, the same walls that glorified the Aten would be chiseled bare, and the erasure would begin not by foreign invaders, but by the hands of Akhenaten's own successors. By the closing years of the 18th dynasty, around 1332 BCE, the walls of Akhetaten began to change. In the tombs and temples once devoted to the Aten, the faces of Akhenaten and Nefertiti were struck from the stone. In some scenes, the god's solar disk was left floating in the sky, its rays ending abruptly where royal hands had been. Elsewhere, whole panels were hacked out, leaving scars of bare limestone. The campaign was systematic. At the great temple of the Aten, blocks bearing the king's name were pried out and reused in other building projects. Reliefs from the tomb of Moriah II were chiseled until the royal profiles were unrecognizable. Even the inscriptions in Akhenaten's own royal tomb were targeted, his cartouches erased as if to make the space anonymous. Responsibility for this erasure is still debated. Tutankhamun, who abandoned Atenism early in his reign, restored the old gods and moved the royal court back to Thebes. It's possible he began the process quietly, removing the most visible symbols of his father or brother's revolution. His successor, may have continued it. But the most thorough purge seems to have taken place under Horemheb, who not only dismantled Akhenaten's monuments, but ordered his name omitted from official king lists, erasing nearly 2 decades from Egypt's recorded history. Archaeologists have pieced together this destruction through reused blocks, talatat, found in the foundations of later buildings at Karnak and Luxor. On some, faint traces of Akhenaten's distinctive features survive under layers of plaster and fresh carving. Others show half-finished erasures, where the chisel marks are still visible. The goal was more than political revenge. In ancient Egypt, to erase a name and image was to deny a person existence in the afterlife. The heretic king was not just overthrown in memory, he was to be unmade entirely. Yet even this campaign left gaps. One figure escaped the full sweep of destruction, not because her memory was cherished, but because her end remains unknown. She had once stood beside the king as his equal, sharing in the Aten's light, and then, without warning, she vanished. In the golden years of Akhetaten, Nefertiti stood beside the king as an equal. Her image adorned temple walls, her name appeared in inscriptions alongside his, and in some scenes she alone received the Aten's rays. By year 12 of Akhenaten's reign, around 1338 BCE, she was more than a queen. She was nearly divine. And then she vanishes. Her name stops appearing on monuments. Her image is absent from the later reliefs. In official records from the final years of Akhenaten's rule, she is silent. What happened in those last 3 or 4 years remains one of ancient Egypt's most debated mysteries. One theory is that she died suddenly, perhaps from illness or complications of childbirth, and was buried in Amarna. No tomb has been found to confirm it. Another proposes she took on a new role as Pharaoh Smenkhkare, ruling briefly as co-regent before Akhenaten's death. A theory supported by fragmentary inscriptions naming a ruler Nefertiti. Others believe she outlived Akhenaten but fell from power during the religious reversal under Tutankhamun. Archaeological clues are tantalizing. In tomb KV35 in the Valley of the Kings, an unidentified mummy known as the Younger Lady shows familial DNA links to Tutankhamun. Some suggest she could be Nefertiti, others argue she was one of Akhenaten's sisters. CT scans reveal she suffered a violent head wound before death, but whether it was accidental, ritual, or deliberate is unknown. If Nefertiti was buried in Amarna, her tomb may still lie hidden beneath the desert's shifting sands. Some believe it could be concealed within or behind the walls of Tutankhamun's own tomb, a theory given momentum by radar scans that detected anomalies in 2015, though follow-up studies remain inconclusive. More than 3,000 years after she disappeared from history, her face, immortalized in a painted bust now in Berlin, is still one of the most famous images of the ancient world. But the story behind it is unfinished. The city where she once ruled lies silent, its stones scarred by erasure, its tombs empty or abandoned. Somewhere perhaps one chamber still holds the answer, and when it is found, Egypt's history will have to be rewritten. The city Akhenaten, built to capture the sun's light, has long since fallen into shadow. Its temples lie in ruins, its tombs stand empty, and the names that once filled its walls have been cut away. Yet the questions remain, carved as deeply into history as they were into stone. Who was laid to rest here? Who was hidden, and who was never meant to be found? If the riddles of Amarna have stirred your curiosity, know that Egypt hides many more, and beyond its deserts, the world keeps its own. Like this video, subscribe to Riddle Me This Mysteries, and step into the stories time tried to erase. Somewhere out there, another sealed chamber still waits, and its discovery could change everything.